Good day, everyone. I am Irene Mayana Aaron, and I am discussing to you today the assessment of personality. The assessment of personality is have the topic personality and personality assessment. Under this is the personality assessment, traits, types, and states. Under the personality assessment, some basic questions are the who, what, where, and how. Personality assessment and overview. In 1950s, rock and roll classic song entitled Personality, sung by Lloyd Price, described the subject of that song with the classic words walk, talk, smile, and charm. Price used the term personality the way most people tend to use it. For lay people, a personality refers to components of an individual's makeup that can elicit positive or negative reactions from others. For someone who consistently tends to elicit the positive reactions from others is thought to have a good personality. For someone who consistently tends to elicit not so good reaction from others is thought to have a bad personality. Perhaps, worse yet, no personality. Personality and personality assessment. Personality, there are dozens of different definitions of personality exist in the psychology literature. Some definitions appear to be all-inclusive. For McClelland, personality is the most adequate conceptualization of a person's behavior in all its details. While for Menninger of 1953, the individual as a whole, his height and weight and love and hates and blood pressures and reflexes, his smiles and hopes and bowed legs and large tonsils, it means all that anyone is and that he is trying to become. Some definitions focus narrowly on a particular aspect of the individual, whereas others view the individual in the context of society. There are some theories that avoid any definition at all. The example of that theorist is Byrne of 1974, characterized the entire area of personality psychology as psychologist's garbage bin, in that any research which doesn't fit other existing categories can be labeled personality. There are widely read and authoritative textbook, The Theories of Personality, written by Hall and Lindsay of 1970. They wrote there that it is our conviction that no substantive definition of personality can be applied with any generality, and personality is defined by the particular empirical concepts which are a part of the theory of personality employed by the observer. Noting that there were important theoretical differences in many theories of personality, Hall and Lindsay encouraged their readers to select a definition of personality from the many presented and adapt it as their own. For our purposes, we will define personality as an individual's unique constellation of psychological traits that is relatively stable over time. We view, we view this definition as one that has the advantage of parsimony, yet still is flexible enough to incorporate a wide variety of variables. Included in this definition, then, are variables in which individuals may differ, such as values, interests, attitudes, worldview, acculturation, sense of humor, cognitive and behavioral styles, and personality states. Personality assessment. What is personality assessment? It is defined as the measurement and evaluation of psychological traits, states, values, interests, attitudes, worldview, acculturation, sense of humor, cognitive and behavioral styles, and or related individual characteristics. In this chapter, we overview the process of personality assessment, including the different approaches to the construction of personality tests, traits, types, and states. Personality traits. Just as no consensus exists regarding the definition of personality, there is none regarding the definition of trait. Theories such as Gordon Allport have tended to view personality traits as real physical entities that are bona fide mental structures in each personality. For Allport, a trait is a generalized and focalized neuropsychic system peculiar to the individual with the capacity to render many stimuli functionally equivalent and to initiate and guide consistent equivalent forms of adaptive and expressive behavior. For Robert Holt of 1971, there are real structures inside people that determine their behavior in lawful ways. Robert Holt of 1971 conceptualized these structures as changes in brain chemistry that might occur as a result of learning. Learning causes submicroscopic structural changes in the brain, probably in the organization of its biochemical substance. Raymond Cattell of 1950 conceptualized traits as mental structures, but for him, structure did not necessarily imply actual physical status. In our own preference, it is to shy away from definition that elevate trait to the status of physical existence. We view psychological traits as attribution made in an effort to identify threads of consistency in behavioral patterns. There is a definition of personality trait offered by Guilford of 1959 that he says, an indistinguishable relatively enduring way in which one individual varies from one another. This relatively simple definition has some aspects in common with the writings of other personality theorists such as Allport of 1973. But let us first define distinguishable. It indicates that behaviors labeled with different trait terms are actually different from one another. So example of this is a behavior labeled friendly should be distinguishable from a behavior labeled friendly. The context or the situation in which the behavior is displayed is important in applying trait terms to behaviors. A behavior present in one context may be labeled with one trait term, but the same behavior exhibited in another context may be better described using another trait term. For Allport of 1937, so Guilford did not assert that traits represent enduring ways in which individuals vary from one another. Rather, he said, relatively enduring. Relatively emphasizes that exactly how a particular trait manifests itself is, at least to some extent, dependent on the situation. So Allport of 1937 addressed the issue of cross-situational consistency of traits or lack of it as follows. First is the perfect consistency will never be found and must not be expected. People may be ascendant and submissive. Submissive only towards those individuals bearing traditional symbol of authority and prestige, and towards everyone else aggressive and domineering. The third one is the The ever-changing environment raises now one trait and now another to a state of active tension. For years, there are personality theories and assessors that have assumed that personality traits are relatively enduring over the course of one's life. So Roberts and Dalvish of 2000 explored the endurance of traits by means of a meta-analysis of 152 longitudinal studies. These researchers concluded that trait consistency increases in a step-like pattern until one is 50 to 59 years old, at which time such consistency peaks. Their findings may be interpreted as compelling testimony to the relatively enduring nature of personality traits over the course of one's life. So, do you think the physically aggressive hockey player pictured in this trait aggressiveness and flare-ups on the ice will still be as physically aggressive during her retirement years? So, no. As they age, they also um, they decreases their playing strategy. So for Guilford definition, a trait is described as a way in which one individual varies from another. Let's emphasize here that the attribution of a trait term is always a relative phenomenon. For instance, some behavior described as patriotic may differ greatly from other behavior also described as patriotic. There are no absolute standards in describing an individual as patriotic. In essence, making an unstated comparison with the degree of patriotic behavior that could reasonably be expected to be exhibited under the same or similar circumstances. Personality types. Personality type is a constellation of traits that is similar in pattern to one identified category of personality within a taxonomy of personalities. Whereas traits are frequently discussed as if they were characteristics possessed by an individual, types are more clearly descriptions for people. For example, describing an individual as depressed is different from describing that individual as a depressed type. The latter term has more far-reaching implications regarding characteristic aspects of the individual, such as the person's worldview, activity level, capacity to enjoy life, and level of social interest. Hippocrates' classification of people into four types. This is the melancholic, phlegmatic, choleric, and sanguine. There has been no shortage of personality typologies through the ages. There is a typology devised by Carl Jung in 1923 that became the basis for the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, or the MBTI. An assumption guiding the development of this test was that people exhibit definite preferences in the way that they perceive or become aware of and judge or arrive at conclusions about people, events, situations, and ideas. John Holland argued that most people can be categorized as one of the following six personalities: artistic, enterprising, investigative, social, realistic, and conventional. His self-directed search test is a self-administered, self-scored, and self-interpreted aid used to type people according to this system and to offer vocational guidance. Another personality typology, this one have, having only two categories and was devised by Mayer Friedman and Ray Rosenman. It is the type A personality and type B personality. Type A personality is characterized by competitiveness, haste, restlessness, impatience, feelings of being time pressured, and strong needs for achievement and dominance. While the type B personality is the opposite of the type A's, trait, mellow or laid back. A 52 self-report inventory called the Jenkins Activity Survey has been used to type respondents as type A or type B personality. Personality states. The word states has been used in at least two distinctly different ways in the personality assessment literature. In one usage, a personality state is an inferred psychodynamic disposition designed to convey the dynamic quality of id, ego, and superego in perpetual conflict. Presently, a more popular usage of the term state, and the one we use in the discussion, refers to the transitory exhibition of some personality trait. For example, your friend may be accurately described as being in an anxious state before her midterms, though no one who knows her would describe her as an anxious person. Measuring personality states amounts, in essence, to a search for and an assessment of the strength of traits that are relatively transitory or fairly situation specific. Relatively few personality tests seek to distinguish traits from states. So there is a path-breaking work in this area done by Charles D. Spielberger and his associates. They developed a number of personality inventories designed to distinguish various states from traits. In the manual for the State Trait Anxiety Inventory, personality assessment, some basic questions. So there are some questions that, for example, is this or the following questions. For what type of employment is a person with this type of personality best suited? Is this individual sufficiently well adjusted for military service? What emotional and other adjustment-related factors may be responsible for this student's level of academic achievement? What pattern of traits and states does this psychotherapy client events? And to what extent may this pattern be deemed pathological? How has this patient's personality been affected by neurological trauma? We might raise the same question in the context of basic research and find another wide world of potential applications for personality assessment. Who? Who is being assessed and who is doing the assessing? Some methods of personality assessment rely on the assessor's own self-report. Assessors may respond to interview questions, answer questionnaires in writing, black and squares on computer, answer forms, or sort cards with various terms on them, with the ultimate objective of providing the assessor with a personality-related self-description. Other methods of personality assessment rely on informants other than the person being assessed to provide personality-related information. The self as the primary referent. People typically undergo personality assessment so that they, as well as the assessors, can learn something about who they are. In many instances, the assessment or some aspect of it requires the self-report. It is a process wherein information like that about assessors is supplied by the assessors themselves. Self-reported information may be obtained in the form of diaries kept by assessees or in the form of responses to oral or written questions or test items. There are also some cases that the information sought by the assessor is so private that only the individual assessees themselves are capable of providing it. Self-report methods are very commonly used to explore and assess the self-concept. So self-concept is defined as one's attitudes, beliefs, opinions, and related thoughts about oneself. There are inferences about an assessor's self-concept may be derived from many tools of assessment. However, the tool of choice is typically a dedicated self-concept measure. That is an instrument designed to yield information relevant to how an individual sees him or herself with regard to selected psychological variables. Some measures of self-concept are based on the notion that states and traits related to self-concept are to a large degree context dependent, that is ever changing as a result of the particular situation. The term self-concept differentiation refers to the degree to which a person has different self-concepts in different roles. Another person as a reference. The best available method for the assessment of personality behavior or both involve reporting by a third party such as a parent, teacher, peer, supervisor, spouse, or trained observer. For example of this is the assessment of a child for emotional difficulties. The child may be unable or unwilling to complete any measure of self-report, performance, or otherwise that will be of value in making a valid determination concerning the child's emotional status. Even case history data may be of minimal value because the problems may be subtle as to become evident only after careful and sustained observation. In general, there are many quotients to consider when one person undertakes to evaluate another. These quotients are by no means limited to the area of personality assessment. Rather, in any situation when one individual undertakes to rate another individual, it is important to understand the dynamics of the situation. There are generalized biases to rate in a particular direction, are referred to in terms such as leniency error or generosity error and severity error. A general tendency to rate everyone near the midpoint of a rating scale is termed an error of central tendency. In some situations, a particular set of circumstances may create a certain bias. The rater may feel competitive with, physically attracted to, or physically repelled by the subject of the ratings. Raters may make biased judgment consciously or unconsciously simply because it is in their own self-interest to do so. Therapists who passionately believe in efficacy of a particular therapeutic approach may be more disposed than others to see the benefits of that approach. Numerous other factors may contribute to biases in a rater's rating. The cultural background of assessors. Test developers and users have shown increased sensitivity to issues of cultural diversities. A number of concerns have been raised regarding the use of personality tests and other tools of assessment with members of culturally and linguistically diverse populations. What? What is assessed when a personality assessment is conducted? For many personality tests, it is meaningful to answer this question with reference to the primary content area sampled by the test and to that portion of the test devoted to the measuring aspects of the test taker's general response style. So, primary content area sampled. Personality measures are tools used to gain insight into a wide array of thoughts, feelings, and behaviors associated with all aspects of the human experience. Some tests are designed to measure particular traits such as introversion or states such as test anxiety, whereas others focus on descriptions of behavior, usually in particular contexts. For example, of this is an observational checklist may concentrate on classroom behaviors associated with movement in order to assess a child's hyperactivity. Test takers' response styles or the response style. This refers to a tendency to respond to a test item or interview question in some characteristic manner, regardless of the content of the item or question. This particular pattern of responding is characterized as acquiescent. So, impression management is a term used to describe the attempt to manipulate others' impression through the selective exposure of some information. It may be false information coupled with suppression of other information. In the process of personality assessment, assessors might employ any number of impression management strategies for any number of reasons. For example, an individual may be more apt to respond yes or true than no or false in a short answer test. So impression management is a term used to describe the attempt to manipulate others' impressions through the selective exposure of some information. It may be false information coupled with suppression of other information. Where? Where are personality assessments conducted? It may be conducted at schools, clinics, hospitals, academic research laboratories, employment counseling, vocational selection centers, offices of psychologists, and counselors. In addition to such traditional venues, contemporary assessors may be found observing behavior and making assessment in natural settings, ranging from the assessor's own home or to the assessor's prison cell. How? How are personality assessments structured and conducted? Look at various facets of this multidimensional question, beginning with issues of scope and theory. Scope and theory. One dimension of the how of personality assessment concern its scope. The scope of an evaluation may be very wide, seeking to take a kind of general inventory of an individual's personality. The California Psychological Inventory is an example of an instrument with a relatively wide scope. This test contains 434 true-false items, but then you knew that from its title and is designed to yield information on many personality-related variables such as responsibility, self-acceptance, and dominance. It was originally conceived to measure enduring personality traits across cultural groups and predict the behavior of generally well-functioning people. Also, there is an instrument that designed to focus on as little as one particular aspect of personality. The example of this is the locus of control. Locus of control is the person's perception about the source of things that happen to him or her. People who, in general, these are the people who see themselves as largely responsible for what happens to them are said to have an internal locus of control, while the people who are prone to attribute what happens to them to external factors such as fate or the actions of others are said to have an external locus of control. Procedures and item formats. Personality may be assessed by many different methods such as face-to-face interviews, computer-administered tests, behavioral observation, paper and pencil tests, evaluation of case history data, evaluation of portfolio data, and recording of physiological responses. The equipment required for assessment varies greatly depending upon the method employed. Frame of reference. So, another variable relevant to the how of personality measurement concerns the frame of reference of the assessment. In the context of the item, format, and assessment in general, frame of reference may be defined as the aspects of the focus of exploration, such as the time frame, like the past, present, or the future, as well as other contextual issues that involve people, places, and events. Perhaps for most measures of personality, the frame of reference for the assessee may be described in phrases such as what is or how am I right now. However, so what I could be ideally, how I am in the office, how others see me, how I see others, and so forth. Scoring and interpretation. Personality measures differ with respect to the way conclusions are drawn from the data they provide. For other measures, a computer program to apply highly technical manipulations of the data is required for purposes of scoring and interpretation. Yet other measures may require a highly trained clinician reviewing a verbatim transcript of what the assessee said in response to certain stimuli such as ink blots or picture. For some paper and pencil measures, a simple tally of responses to targeted items is presumed to provide a measure of the strength of a particular trait. So there is also a meaningful to it is also meaningful to dichotomize the measures with respect to the nomothetic versus idiographic approach. Nomothetic approach to assessment is characterized by efforts to learn how a limited number of personality traits can be applied to all people. In contrast to a nomothetic view is the idiographic one. The idiographic approach to assessment is characterized by efforts to learn about each individual's unique constellation of personality traits with no attempt to characterize each person according to any particular set of traits. Issues in personality test development and use. Many of the issues inherent in the test development process mirror the basic questions just discussed about personality assessment in general. So, as previously noted, personality assessment that relies exclusively on self-report is a two-edged sword. So, these are the example questions for the issues in personality tests. What test takers will these tests be designed to be used with? Will the test entail self-report or will it require the use of raters or judges? If raters or judges are needed, what special training or other qualifications must they have? How will a reasonable level of inner rater reliability be ensured? What content area will be sampled by the test? How will issues of test taker response style be dealt with? What item format should be employed, and what is the optimal frame of reference? How will the test be scored and interpreted? That are the some issues in personality test development. So That's all for my part, and thank you for listening.